The day the crystal dome gleamed brightest was the day it cracked, not in glass but in meaning. 200 species filled the tiers of the Galactic Council, robes and chitin and mist, all pretending that procedure was the same thing as justice. At the floor beneath the auditorium of Empire, the human delegation stood smaller than the podium, smaller than the whispers. Ambassador Maya Reyes didn't clear her throat. She knew better than to ask theater for permission. The motion before us, droned the speaker, a translucent elder whose voice had the weight of centuries and the delicacy of dust, is to reassign 17 human colonial systems to senior member stewardship for the sake of stability. Stewardship. The word arrived perfumed and poisonous. Reyes did not plead. Those worlds were surveyed, settled, and kept alive by our people. Our filings are in order. Your own statutes recognize discovery, improvement, and continuous care. A warlord from the Vrax Dominion rose, 9 feet of antique metal and old certainty. Paper is not blood, he said, his crest chiming. Humans drew lines over lanes we patrolled for a millennium. Young species should not hold frontiers their elders cannot protect. The speaker called for a vote. Names flickered. Light bled green where it should have glowed gold. It took less than 10 minutes to convert decades of human courage into a bureaucratic theft. The dome did not shatter. It simply reflected 1,000 faces that had decided theft was tidy if it wore a quorum. The motion passes, the speaker concluded, voice tender with false mercy. Compliance within 30 standard days. The galleries expected human anger, fist-pounding, slogans, the desperate music of species that believed volume could substitute for leverage. Reyes merely inclined her head. Behind her, 5 aides closed their tablets without a sound. On the feed, Earth's watchers did not see fury. They saw something older. Silence. It wasn't the silence of defeat or the stunned hush after a blow. It was the quiet a carpenter keeps before driving the first nail. Reyes requested a brief recess. Granted. She stepped into a corridor of cold light, pressed her palm to a console, and transmitted a message to Cheyenne Deep that contained only 3 words, coded older than the council: begin the Sabbath. Across human space, ports dimmed their signs. News anchors read the vote without commentary and then looked into their cameras as if they could see the homes on the other side. Ships already in transit altered courses without broadcasting why. Colonies took down the flags of friendly neighbors and did not replace them with angry ones. School bells rang, lesson plans changed. On the feeds of elder species, pundits smirked. Young races bark, they said. They do not bite. Merchants sighed and recalculated risk. A few diplomats, the ones who remembered humanity's brief, stubborn history, looked at their calendars and swallowed. Reyes returned to the chamber and made the only public statement Earth would offer that month. The Council's will is clear, she said, gaze steady, voice small enough to force the microphones to work. Earth acknowledges the vote. We will withdraw. We will not appeal. We will take 30 days to put our house in order. Her mouth formed the rest without moving. We will show you what a house is. Hook laid, the dome glittered, and the quorum congratulated itself. The eldest among them mistook quiet for absence. They had forgotten a very human truth. The silence between drumbeats is part of the rhythm, not the end of the song. That night, in a windowless room carved into the spine of a mountain, Admiral Aaron Cole took a key off a hook that hadn't been touched since before he was born. He turned it like a prayer. Somewhere in the belt, machines woke up and remembered their first language. A child in Kansas asked her father why the flag at school looked heavier today. Because promises weigh more when people try to steal them, he said, and wrapped her lunch in wax paper like his grandfather had. On Europa, a welder traced a seam no one else could see. The council slept well, pleased with its stewardship. Earth did not sleep. It listened to heartbeat, to tide, to the sound a country makes when it decides not to explain itself to thieves. 30 days, the speaker had said. 30 days would be enough. 30 days would be exactly enough. In Washington, the lights in the West Wing stayed on, but the briefings went short. No podium flares, no martyrs' rhetoric. Law professors drafted letters that would never be mailed to an institution that had revealed itself unteachable. Chaplains moved into shift work, somewhere on a base with no name. A Marine captain told her platoon they would train without shouting for 30 days, because the whole point of a vow is to remind you that control is a virtue. Admiral Cole convened his staff beneath a map that wasn't borders or trade lanes but supply. On it, the arteries of a civilization pulsed: grain, water, medicines, the slow river of parts that becomes the fast river of ships. "We are not waging war," he said. "We are correcting a record. Our doctrine is simple: protect families, preserve food, prepare futures." Colonel Jaiwan Park, logistics with the face of an insomniac saint, laid out the work. Asteroid Yard 12 can go from cruise liners to hull keels in 8 days if we feed it steel and songs. Sao Paulo Orbital can switch back to antimatter bottling if we unlock the vault the bishop sealed. Milwaukee still knows how to stamp a rib that fits anything we fly. The unions already sent the signal. Their people are in the parking lots handing out coffee. "Risk?" Cole asked. "Everything," Park said. "But we're Americans. We do homework when the test is unfair." The silence rippled outward. On Mars, a classroom did a unit on Reconstruction instead of star botany, because kids deserve to learn how a nation makes itself again after someone tries to break it. In a barrio in Los Angeles, a muralist sketched a carrier rising out of a wheat field. In Savannah, a machinist with hands like oak wrote "no shortcuts" in grease pencil across a terminal that had been running tourist shuttles to ringside honeymoon suites. The press called. Reyes didn't answer. Her staff posted one sentence on every channel Earth controlled and none it didn't. "We will comply with the vote in 30 days. We ask our friends not to intercede. We ask our enemies not to mistake grief for permission." It was the most American sentence imaginable: courteous, final, and armed from the inside. Out past Neptune, older lights turned on. Hulls that had slept as museums quickened, their plates drinking power like parched mouths. Blueprints with dates that belonged in antique shops slid from drawers into gloved hands. The labels on them read Leviathan, Supercarrier, Minuteman Array, Hush Kite, Ark Run, and in a handwriting that made Cole smile despite himself: "Don't show the council unless they steal from us." The talk platforms in the elder civilizations filled with certainty. "Humanity is staging a symbolic withdrawal," said a scholar whose teeth were too white for wisdom. "They will negotiate access concessions and call it dignity." A merchant prince shorted human bonds. A warlord ordered a parade. Far from cameras, a dockworker from the Crex Coalition whispered to his wife, "You remember how their nurses held our twins after the fever? I don't think they do parades." Silence did not mean stillness. It never had. It meant coordination. The Sabbath Admiral Cole had declared was an old American practice with a new application. Set aside the loud business to tend the essential. You light the stove and mend the roof. You forgive your neighbor and fix the fence. You look your children in the eye and say, "We won't always get it right, but we will not let anyone take your home." On day 15, Park rolled a freight plan across the table so dense the staff broke into applause. "Every colony we're surrendering," she said, "has already loaded its archives and clinics. Families have sealed keepsakes. We're leaving clean power, stable atmospheres, scrubbed water. If they wanted our sweat, they'll get our standards too." "And the fleets?" Cole asked. Learning to breathe again, Park said, "We won't show them, not yet." On Earth, pulpits and classrooms preached a theology of neighborliness that made diplomats nervous and naval officers calm. "Law is important," a rabbi told a packed hall in Brooklyn, "but covenant is what you keep when someone else breaks law." The congregation nodded like they'd been waiting to hear that in space all their lives. By day 29, 1,000 little levers had been pulled in the same direction, not because a tyrant snapped his fingers, but because a republic remembered how to be a choir. The council's clerks slept poorly the night before compliance. They had been warned by nothing and everything at once. 30 days ended at dawn. Ray's father had taught civics in a classroom with a crooked radiator and a photo of a bridge that had once carried a march toward a better country. When she was 12, she'd asked him why the Bill of Rights read like a list of things someone had already tried to take. "Because it is," he'd said. "America writes law the way carpenters write plans, after they learn which beams crack in a storm." The council had cracked a beam. In Cheyenne Deep, Cole stood before a wall of names, not ships' families. Names from Appalachia and the Delta, from the Navajo Nation and the Bronx, from the farms around Nairobi and the barrios around Manila, because the United States had learned over a century that American did not mean a single shore. He touched the glass and spoke as if the names were a quorum more legitimate than the one under the dome. "Our doctrine is called the Quiet Return," he said to the gathered captains. "Its pillars: 1, we do not kill for pride. 2, we do not abandon our own. 3, we do not allow theft to instruct the young that surrender is sensible." Captain Noor al-Hadi, Arkship Command, raised a hand. "And mercy is a boundary, not a weakness," Cole said. "We leave the lights on where we can. We do not pretend darkness is a friend." The briefing ran like a civics class. Park pointed to graphs that would have bored a hothead and thrilled a quartermaster. "If we flip the Minuteman array, we can flood the Reach with tugs and medships before their stewards unpack their robes. If we light Leviathans, we do it at once. No previews. Surprise preserves lives." "What about the council chamber?" someone asked. Ray's answered on a secure link, hair pulled back, eyes doing that American thing where grief stands next to humor like old neighbors. "I'll return when we're done, not to scold, to offer terms. We are not building vengeance. We are installing a fence." Beyond procedures, the Quiet Return had a philosophy any American kid would recognize from an after-school job. Do the work right, don't waste parts, don't lie. Teachers turned it into assignments. One unit paired the Federalist Papers with orbital mechanics. Another asked students to design a supply run that left a seized colony safer than we found it. Third graders in Tulsa held a pencil vote on whether to donate their classes 3D printer hours to a Mars clinic. 98% said yes. The other 2% were reminded kindly that democracy means living with the better angels of your neighbors. Foreign feeds called it propaganda. Americans called it Tuesday. On day 28, Cole walked the Leviathan Bay. The ship in the dock looked like a neighborhood made of armor, blocky, serious, painted the color of rain. Along her flank, welders had chalked names, towns, grandmothers, baseball teams. A kid's crayon drawing of a whale had been laminated to a bulkhead because it made the engineers work straighter. "What do you call her?" Park asked. "Minnesota," Cole said, "because she looks slow until she isn't." He slept 3 hours that night the way fathers nap in chairs. He dreamed of wheat under a sky full of contrails that meant breakfast would be on time. In the council, the speaker reviewed his remarks for the morning, kind, condescending, full of the old words. He did not look out the window. The dome reflected nothing but itself. The day before compliance, Reyes sent a single line to every signatory who had ever kept a promise to Earth when no one was looking. "We will not forget you in what comes next. Stand clear, stand ready." The replies were sparse, brave, and quiet. Lantern emojis from dock workers, a hymn text from a chaplain, a photograph of a child's hands holding a model ship. That night, winds changed over the belt. Machines hummed at a register you felt in your ribs before you heard it. Somewhere an old lineman turned his cap backward, spat, and said, "Throw it." Compliance Day began like a funeral and became a birth. At 0600 Council Standard, human embassies lowered their flags from the seized colonies and broadcast the same bland valediction in 100 languages. "We leave our clinics stocked, our water clean, our power stable. We leave the keys in the drawer marked neighbors. We will not be returning under your terms." In orbit above those worlds, the new steward ships drifted in on polished burns, expecting sullen crowds and manageable logistics. What they found were empty piers with thank you posters from children, inventories signed in a handwriting that made accountants cry with relief, and tucked under each manifest, a recipe: cornbread, pho, jollof, gumbo. The kind of gifts a people leaves when it refuses to let thieves define its exit. At 0700, deep-range sensors began to ring. The first returns came from a dust lane no sane pilot used for Maine. Shadows the size of small towns detached themselves from the dark and lit their running lights one by one. Not Council white, Earth blue. Minnesota led, her profile impossible, prows like cathedral ribs, engines like a choir inhaling. To either side unfolded carriers named for places Americans talk about when they miss home: Savannah, Taos, Bronx, Chesapeake, Juneau. Behind them, phantoms, sleek, mean, the color of pewter, slipped in formation with tugboats that wore yellow hazard paint like proud uniforms. They did not decloak with fanfare. They arrived the way a fire department arrives, competent, a little tired-looking, utterly unambiguous about purpose. Admiral Cole appeared on 1,000 screens, not in a dress uniform, but in the same work blues he'd been wearing for a month. "This is Admiral Aaron Cole of the United States and its allies," he said, voice lined with gravel and Sunday. "We acknowledge the Council's vote. We will not contest your paperwork. We will correct your assumptions." Behind him, floodlights washed across the decks as crews took stations in movements so practiced they looked like prayer. Drones lofted, angels with socket wrenches. Hospital ships angled their bows toward lanes that had grown dangerous in the last 30 arrogant years. A convoy of school transports, painted white, windows bright, names of poets along the flanks, moved into the reach with an escort fit for kings. The first steward captain to speak made the worst choice a certain kind of officer loves. "Human vessels, you are in violation." "No," Cole said softly, "we're in the neighborhood." He transmitted the quiet returns rules to every ship and every port and every living room that still had a radio. 5 lines, 1. We will not fire first. 2. We will not leave families hungry. 3. We will not be bullied. 4. We will not explain beyond this. 5. We will be here. The council chamber erupted, of course. Lights flashed. Delegates rose and performed alarm like a symphony. The speaker tried to gavel the tide. Reyes sat in the human section, face unreadable, hands folded like a woman waiting for a train whose schedule she trusted. Out in the Reach, a Vrax cruiser tested a human picket line with a pointed nudge. The nudge met a tug's bow and found it to be as gentle as a brick church. The Vrax helmsman blinked at his console as his own engines eased him aside with a politeness that felt like a choke hold. A minute later, he received a recipe and an inventory, and a map labeled Safe Harbor if you are done being silly. His crew laughed. Then they stood down. On seized worlds, crowds gathered on hills to watch sky become architecture. Children pointed with the ferocity of the young. Grandparents cried without the performance that sometimes attends relief. In a station chapel where every symbol got a shelf, a janitor lit a candle and taped a note beneath it. They came back like a promise kept. Cole's last transmission for the day was to the people whose votes had stolen the Reach. "We are not your enemy," he said. "We are your mirror. Look well. We will be here tomorrow and the next day and the day after that. 30 days of silence were our courtesy. What follows is our work." He closed the channel and turned to Park. "Open the schools," he said. "Open the clinics. Rotate the crews. Feed whoever lines up, no questions asked." "And the council?" Park asked. "Ambassador Reyes will handle the liturgy," Cole said with the ghost of a smile. In the chamber, Reyes rose as the dome threw 100 anxious reflections across her face. "Mr. Speaker," she said, "I move to add one item to the agenda, the definition of stewardship." Outside, Leviathans moved like neighborhoods with engines, and the Reach learned the cadence of ships that belonged not to conquerors, but to a country that had decided to be present. Tomorrow would bring ultimatums dressed as questions, and questions that smelled like threats. Tomorrow might bring shots, but tonight, in 1,000 kitchens, recipes left by departing humans were folded into local books. In 1,000 bunks, children slept while stars wrote patient geometry above them. The dome had not shattered. It had learned a new way to reflect. And somewhere in the great quiet after broadcast, an old American sentence placed its hand on the shoulder of a young century. "We hold these truths," and then, with engines warm, finished the clause with conduct. They called the choke point Meridian Gate because every freighter in the outer Reach had to pass its patient asteroid lanterns eventually. It wasn't a gate so much as a memory of one. 3 big rocks someone had bored through, threaded with traffic beacons, wrapped in memorial graffiti from a dozen wars. The council's combined task detachment arrived with signals blaring lawful authority, escorts aligned like a portrait. Their mandate was tidy on paper: interdict unauthorized human vessels, escort new stewards to seized piers, and remind an upstart species that quorum outranks stubbornness. Admiral Cole read the mandate once and tucked it under a mug to keep a coffee ring from staining the table. "We are not here to contest their paper," he told his bridge. "We are here to keep promises. Keep the quiet return in your mouth like a prayer. Don't fire first. Don't leave families hungry. Don't be bullied. Don't explain beyond the rules. Be here." Human ships slid into the lane like firefighters taking corners they'd trained for since rookie year. Minnesota absorbed the field with the weary grace of a big sister. Savannah and Bronx fanned their screens. A lattice of tugs, yellow-nosed, proud as lunch pails, formed a net no lawyer could draft. The council detachment hailed. The voice wore the badge of authority that expects agreement. Human vessels, you are in violation of stewardship code. Cole cut the channel and transmitted 5 lines. The same 5. He didn't add adjectives. He didn't add threat. He added a map, safe lanes around the gate for any ship not attempting seizure, priority passage for med, food, and school traffic, times for public audit of human cargoes so nobody would need to invent monsters in the dark. The detachment captain, an angular aristocrat from a species that revered geometry more than babies, decided to demonstrate. He nosed his cruiser toward a school transport, a white boat named Langston with hopscotch squares painted on its deck. A tug called Hazel slid in with a bow that looked like a laugh and a backbone that sounded like a hymn. The cruiser's attitude thrusters bucked, complained, and then gently but irresistibly were assisted by Hazel's field projectors into a holding pattern that engineers would later describe as polite tractor yoga. Langston sailed through, children's drawings taped to portholes like stained glass. Record that, Colonel Park murmured. Post the vector math and the courtesy protocol. People should know exactly how to be decent. On seized worlds behind the gate, human clinics reopened under lantern signs that read neighbor hours in a dozen scripts. A Keshan grandmother handed a prescription to a nurse who'd learned her language on overnight shifts in Albuquerque. On the piers, stewards found toolkits labeled in 2 tongues. How to maintain the air scrubbers we left you. How to fix the lift your inspectors ignored. Each kit included a recipe. Meridian Gate filled with freighters that smelled faintly of cornbread, pho, jollof, gumbo, food as foreign policy, calorie-dense and unarguable. The council tried a second angle, injunctions. Packets arrived from the chamber, elegant as knives, citing codes that assumed the word steward could erase father and neighbor. Rays read them in the human section and sent back a sentence that would be taught in civics classes by Friday. Stewardship without consent is seizure. Seizure without care is vandalism. We will not abet vandalism. She attached a ledger of human shipments, food, vaccines, textbooks, public, signed, notarized on camera. It was boring. It was devastating. Meridian Gate became a seminar. Human crews narrated procedures on open bands, not for drama, but because transparency is a habit once you've decided not to be clever with children's lives. Tug Hazel to Minnesota, bringing the Keshan med barge alongside. Witness beacons recording. Audit slots open at 15 and 45. Soup on the pier. No questions asked. A Vrax captain, eager to please his elders, tried to push through the net to escort a steward's landing. The net breathed around him and, with a courtesy that felt like humiliation, placed his ship inside a painted circle labeled Time Out. His helm logs would later show who disabled him. His own caution routines, triggered by a human signal that read like gravity. He swore, then laughed, then turned off his guns and accepted a bowl of gumbo sent over in a pressure-safe thermos. His crew ate in a silence that did not taste like surrender. The standoff lasted a day, then 3, then 9. Nothing exploded. Something harder happened. The council's mandate kept colliding with a standard of care. Dockworkers called their cousins and said, "They're not grandstanding. They're doing the job." The stewards who had expected a conquered people found a neighbor who refused to recognize the title conqueror. A Crex union posted a motion. Recognize the quiet return as a custom of the lanes. In shops from Ceres to Calyx, kids doodled tugs with lantern halos. The speaker fumed and scheduled an emergency session. He called Rays to the dais with the brittle politeness of a headmaster who has misplaced his yardstick. Ambassador, explain these operations. Rays folded her hands. You voted to reassign our homes. We complied. You did not vote to starve our former neighbors. We refuse to let that be the accidental effect of your paperwork. She let the sentence breathe. We are present. We are transparent. We will leave when our work is done. Define done, the speaker snapped. When a steward can run a pier without stealing, a clinic without billing in cruelty, a school without losing its roof to graft, Rays said. When a mother can send a child across a dock without that child learning that law is what thieves read to each other. Meridian Gate held. The detachment loitered, resentful but uneasy, the way men who have trained for saber duels feel when the opponent brings a toolbox. The council would escalate. Everyone could feel the prelude tightening. Cole didn't pace. He checked the soup, the audit logs, the hospital ship's supply closet. He slept 4 hours and woke with a sentence in his mouth like a sliver of oak. Standards are not negotiable. Somewhere out past the gate, a different kind of beacon answered, not council, not Vrax. Quiet and old, the tone of a classroom bell. Park looked up from her wall of inventories. They'll try politics next, she said. Good, Cole replied. Bring chairs, we'll need room for witnesses. The council expected a tribunal like the ones they enjoyed, mahogany diction, citations thick as smoke, outcomes that dissolved into footnotes. What arrived instead was a room with bad acoustics and folding chairs. A bronze plaque above the hatch read witness bench, a smaller plate below read chaired by those who lost something. 12 members took their seats. A human teacher who had buried a brother after an airlock accident. A Crex dockhand whose mate had died when a corrupt steward delayed a tug. A Vrax widower who'd learned to boil tea after a war took his kitchen's laughter. An Athurian medic who had once triaged without gloves. They were teenagers and grandparents, mechanics and nurses. Power shifted in the room the way a ship shifts when cargo is finally stacked correctly. Rays insisted on being sworn in the old way, palm up, oath plain. Admiral Cole came in work blues, hat under his arm, the posture of a man who has told the truth with mixed results and intends to do so again. Colonel Park brought a satchel of drives as if she were a librarian arriving to read aloud. A witness with Dominion scars asked first, Admiral, why the tugs and the soup and the open audits? Why not gun lines and ultimatums? Why not make fear teach what law failed to? Because fear is a poor teacher, Cole said. It teaches compliance, not competence. Soup teaches a dock crew they are seen. Tugs teach a steward how to do their job without killing a shift. Audits teach a merchant what honest weight feels like. We're not here to impress. We're here to standardize decency. Standardize. The word tasted strange in alien translators, ordinary in English. We call it the American habit, Park said, opening the drives. This is our commodity flow. This is our maintenance checklist. This is our error budget for days when somebody's kid is sick and a bolt gets missed. She looked at the witnesses, not the diplomats. We brought our homework. The bench asked about Meridian Gate. Cole played the clip of Hazel placing a cruiser in time out. Nobody cheered. They watched the frame-by-frame overlay of forces, the annotation that explained exactly how to stop a ship without breaking her. A Crex witness nodded once, slow, the way men nod when they see an angle protractor used for mercy. A Vrax witness, young, proud, furious at the humiliation of his elders, leaned in. "Is this Empire in overalls, Admiral? A crown pretending to be a wrench?" Reyes answered before Cole could. "Empire extracts tribute and writes hymns to itself," she said. "Stewardship pays invoices and writes down where the leaks are. We're not demanding your anthem. We want your ports to pass an inspection that a sixth grader can grade with a red pencil." Park added a log that startled even allies: human missteps. A tug misjudged a burn and scraped paint from a steward cutter. The human captain apologized on camera, paid for repairs, and baked a cake with sorry iced in shaky Keshan. A hospital ship rationed too tightly the first week and had to borrow from a Dominion barge. The borrowing and the return were recorded in triplicate and posted on the pier. The room absorbed the shock of a species presenting its errors without being cornered. That, more than strength, moved the needles on older minds. The bench issued notes instead of verdicts. Note 1. Publish daily cargo and care audits for all quiet return operations. Translations required. Boards must be placed at eye level for children to read. Note 2. Any interdiction must be recorded by 2 independent beacons and reviewed by a civilian body within 7 days. Note 3. If a steward port meets posted standards for 30 consecutive days, human presence must taper on a schedule published in advance. Note 4. Sanctuary is absolute. Schools, clinics, creches, and food lines are off the board. Any commander who violates sanctuary is unfit to command. Cole signed all 4 without haggling. If rules don't pinch a little, he said, they're decorations. The speaker arrived late, bristling with procedure. "This bench is irregular," he began. A witness with hands like rope interrupted him. "So was my wife's death," he said. "Your regularity didn't keep the hatch sealed." The room quieted. Power moved again, away from old words toward new work. Last to testify was a steward captain whose ship had been time-outed by Hazel. He shuffled, awkward in public apology. "I came to bully," he admitted. "They sent over gumbo." Laughter cracked the tension like ice. "I went home and told my crew to hang a sign on our wardroom, 'Learn to be useful.'" When the session closed, the bench did something none of the council's courts had done in anyone's memory. They scheduled office hours at Meridian Gate. "Bring grievances," the notice read. "Bring repairs you don't know how to make. Bring your teenagers. We'll show them where the manuals are." Empire would have sneered. The Reach lined up. The emergency decree arrived under a grand name: Mandate 14, Provisional Protectorate over the Outer Reach. It declared all quiet return operations interference, all human beacons illegal transmitters, and Meridian Gate a restricted military corridor. It authorized a combined enforcement fleet to restore lawful passage. Lawful for whom? Park asked, deadpan, as Cole read. She circled the phrasings in red like a teacher grading a cheat sheet. The fleet appeared 2 days later, 46 hulls in geometries meant to intimidate, banners blooming like offended flowers. They broadcast a countdown no parent would tolerate from a teenager: 60, 59, 58. Cole did not flank out. He planted the lantern line. That was what crews called it, a ring of satellites and tugs and hospital boats, each with a beacon set to a frequency that made human hearts steady and certain admirals from older species grind their teeth. The line didn't bristle. It shone. "Broadcast the quiet return again," Cole said. Then shut up and do the work. Minnesota opened her bays and launched things that didn't look like weapons until you considered what a civilization needs to function. Drone welders, power spines, water makers, school modules that unfolded like book covers. The enforcement fleet's captains, well-trained in volley and wedge, found themselves aiming artillery at a textbook truck. Somewhere in his gut, each one felt the click of a line that should not be crossed. The council fired anyway, not a shot, but a net of jammers meant to blind the lantern beacons and strand the human standard in static. The net blossomed, elegant and cruel. The lantern line dimmed, flickered, and stayed. Park hadn't been sleeping for nothing. Her teams had wrapped the beacons in redundancy and neighbor tech, mirrored protocols on steward weather stations, piggyback channels through school intercoms, backup timings scrawled on paper and taped to tug dashboards in case the sky went blind. The net suffocated itself on its own geometry. Enforcement ships reported anomalous sympathy effects and unanticipated civilian overlays. The Reach called it our radios. A brash captain from a hard species finally tried to make the moment cinematic. He ordered a run across the line, guns cold but posture hot, aiming to prove the beacons were bluff. Minnesota pivoted, slow as dignity, and placed her shadow over his bow. The sun disappeared. Engines' hum deepened. The captain's crew stared at the bulkhead as if it were an altar or a horizon. Cole opened a narrow channel. "Son," he said with the particular American kindness that makes stubbornness feel seen, "I have no desire to bruise your boat. Back up 15 meters. Then come around to the starboard pier. There's a bench and a mechanic who will walk you through a checklist you should have been taught before they gave you that rank." Silence. Then a cough, a laugh, a fractional thruster pulse. 15 meters. Around to starboard. The lantern line recorded the motion and filed it under salvaged pride. Enforcement tried a different tactic, legal theater. They broadcast footage of human tugs obstructing lawful passage, carefully cropped to omit the soup, the audits, the school ships. Rays countered with the entire day's raw feeds, posted under a license a clever clerk named Plain Sight. Dock unions mirrored the files faster than censors could frown. In 100 living rooms, grandparents pointed at the screens and told kids, "That's what grown-ups look like when they mean it." A minor skirmish did snap in a corner where old grudges stalked the dark. A Vrax corsair mistook a refugee barge for leverage. 2 human corvettes slid in, not with missiles, but with foam cannons that glued the corsair's vents shut and cut her power with the soft finality of a bedtime. Marines boarded, not with combat yells, but with the voice of ER nurses. Calm, crisp, here we go, no casualties. The corsair captain received a printed ticket stapled to a thermos. Violation, predation near sanctuary. Fine, 15 years of dock duty. Lunch, gumbo, see you at 0600. By day 3, Mandate 14 had run into a fact even empires must note. A public that has watched competence loses its taste for grandstanding. Delegations whispered to one another in the corridor behind the crystal dome. What if we adopted the quiet return standards? As ours, you understand. An elder from the Aquatic Coalition said, we could call it stewardship training, save face. Someone from the trade block said nothing at all, just slid a list of ports that wanted audit kits. Cole didn't high-five anyone. He wrote down the ports and sent kits with recipes. We'll feed their pride until it can digest the truth, he told Park. The enforcement fleet withdrew, trumpets down, banners furled. The speaker drafted a new speech and threw it away. Reyes took a walk the length of the human section, counting breaths the way her grandmother had taught her when an argument wanted to turn into a fight. Meridian Gate glowed on the panel behind her desk like a nightlight. "Time for terms," she said. "They met under the dome because you don't rebuild a roof by leaving it." The galleries were full, not with courtiers but with dock foremen, midwives, teachers who smelled faintly of solder and coffee. The speaker looked older, which is to say, briefly honest. He called the session with a voice that understood schedules at last. Reyes walked to the dais carrying a folder of paper. It made the translators hiccup who brings paper to the stars, a people who write things down when they intend to do them. "The council demanded stewardship," she began. "You defined it as possession. We have defined it as presence. Here are our terms." She didn't call them demands. She called them the Harbor Accords. Article 1. Sanctuary, absolute and non-derogeable. Schools, clinics, creches, and food lines are beyond politics. Violate sanctuary and you lose command, commission, and corridor rights. Not for a season, for a generation. Article 2. Witness. Every lane enforcer, steward, port, and human operation will publish daily care and cargo audits in common tongues. The witness bench becomes a permanent organ, funded by a tithe on port fees, chaired by those who have lost, rotated, transparent, hard. Article 3. Competence. Steward ports must meet posted standards for 30 consecutive days to retain assignment. Manuals will be public. Human train-the-trainer teams will operate for a limited term and then taper. Failure to meet standards triggers reassignment, not protest. Article 4. Presence. The quiet return becomes a shared custom of the lanes. Any signatory may fly the lantern beacon when safeguarding sanctuary traffic. Abuse of the beacon is a felony at law and a sin in the eyes of the lanes. Article 5. Boundary. A vote can move paper. It cannot move families without care. Any reassignment must fund clinics, schools, and food for a year. Stewards who call this burden onerous are declaring themselves unfit. She added a preamble in a voice that sounded like a school bell more than a trumpet. "We are not here to rule you. We are here to be your neighbor until you remember how to be each other's." The chamber, accustomed to spectacle, found itself in a PTA meeting with teeth. Delegates asked practical questions. Who pays the witness tithe? Everyone who uses lanes protected by the beacon. How many trainers? As few as possible, as many as needed. What if a lantern ship abuses cover? The bench will publish their name, and the lanes will treat them like a hole in the hull, patched, then shunned for a season that feels like forever. Crex unions signed first because they had long memories of ships that arrived with soup. The Aquatic Coalition signed because they prefer laws that keep water sweet. The Dominion, through a representative whose crest had learned humility, signed with a trembling flourish and added a memorial clause for workers lost to lazy stewarding. A handful abstained. No one dared vote no with their constituents watching raw feeds of tuckered human crews teaching stewards how to calibrate air because kids cough when gauges lie. The speaker floated down. Brittle protocols set aside. "Ambassador Reyes," he said, "you have changed the council more in 30 days than treaties have in 30 years. Reyes shook her head. "Families did, we wrote it down." He looked toward Meridian Gate where the lantern line shone on the big wall like a ruin that refused to be tragic. "And when will you leave?" "When you can keep the lights on without us," Reyes said. "We are not a crown, we are a checklist." The vote passed, not thunderous, solid, the kind of eyes that come from people who have sat through enough hard nights to recognize a plan that honors the morning. Outside, ships moved not with triumph but with schedule. Trainers rode shuttles to ports with clipboards and patience. The witness bench pinned its office hours to the gate's bulkhead and added a hand-drawn map to the best soup. Children of 6 species practiced the lantern frequency on toy radios, then put the radios away because homework is still due on Thursday. Cole retired his fleet to a posture that looked like a porch light left on, present, unintrusive, a promise implied. Park kept her wall of inventories because standards decay when you stop counting. Minnesota idled by the gate long enough for welders to chalk new names along her flank, ports that had passed inspection, kids who'd had their inhalers refilled, a steward captain who'd learned the difference between posture and duty, and sent over a cake with thank you iced in an earnest, crooked hand. On the anniversary of the vote that broke the dome, the council held no pomp. A janitor from a cinnamon-smelling species polished the memorial panels. Dockworkers brought coffee to the witness bench. A teacher read the harbor accords aloud to a room of teenagers who rolled their eyes because teenagers do, and then 3 pages in quieted. Somewhere a parent set a bowl of gumbo under a lantern because rituals matter. Ray stood beneath the dome and traced the arch the way an architect checks a line. We didn't win, she whispered to no one in particular. We showed up. The dome didn't answer. It reflected 100 small lights from ships on honest errands. HFY Stories like to end with a roar. The quiet return ended with a calendar, audits at 15 and 45, soup at noon, office hours at 3, tugs on call, lanterns maintained, names remembered. The council had betrayed Earth. Earth had answered in silence. The answer, it turned out, was not a threat but a standard. And in the reach, standards feel like weather, sometimes harsh, often bracing, always the thing you dress for if you intend to be decent in public. The children slept under beacons their grandparents had learned to trust. The lanes hummed. The gate sang its little song. And far away, in a classroom with a crooked radiator, a civics teacher wrote the day's objective on a chalkboard older than the stars. How to keep a promise when the vote goes wrong.